In 1989, Freddy Fender was playing to empty tables in a small Texas dive bar, a far cry from his days of topping the Billboard charts. But that night, three legendary musicians in the crowd saw something others had missed: a chance to create one of the most remarkable comebacks in country music history. Doug Sahm, Flaco Jimenez, and Augie Myers weren't your typical bar crowd. Between them, they had decades of experience in Tex-Mex music, and they heard something special in Freddy's voice. That same golden tone that had once made him a superstar. What happened next would not only resurrect Freddy's career, but create a musical movement that would influence generations. But to understand the magnitude of this comeback, we need to go back to where it all began, to a young Mexican-American boy in San Benito, Texas, who dreamed of becoming a rock and roll star. Born Baldemar Huerta in 1937, Freddy's story reads like a Hollywood script. The son of migrant workers, he spent his childhood following the harvest with his family, picking tomatoes by day and singing Mexican boleros by night. His mother's transistor radio introduced him to a world beyond the fields, the sounds of Elvis Presley, Hank Williams, and the blues masters who would shape his unique style. Those early years in the fields left an indelible mark on young Baldemar. Working alongside his parents, he learned the value of hard work and perseverance. But he also discovered the power of music to lift spirits and unite people. The workers would gather after long days in the fields, sharing songs that spoke of love, loss, and hope. Themes that would later define Freddy's own music. By age 16, he was already breaking barriers, earning the nickname El Bebop Kid for his ability to blend rock and roll with traditional Mexican music. His first recordings, made in 1957 for a small San Benito label, showcased a voice that was remarkably mature for a teenager. The local Spanish-language radio stations picked up these early tracks, making him a regional sensation along the Texas-Mexico border. But in the 1950s, Texas, being a Mexican-American artist, wasn't easy. Despite his growing popularity, many venues remained closed to him, and major labels showed little interest in an artist who sang in both English and Spanish. That's when he made a decision that would change his life. He became Freddy Fender, taking his new surname from the guitar he played. The transformation worked. In 1975, his bilingual recording of Before the Next Teardrop Falls shot to #1 on both the country and pop charts, making him one of the first Latin artists to achieve mainstream country success. The follow-up Wasted Days and Wasted Nights proved it wasn't a fluke. Freddy Fender had arrived. Music critics called him a pioneer, a voice that could bridge cultures and genres with ease. His performances on national television drew millions of viewers, and his concerts sold out across the country. For a brief moment in the mid-1970s, Freddy Fender was everywhere, his distinctive voice and heartfelt delivery making him one of country music's most recognizable stars. But success in the music industry can be as fleeting as a Texas summer rain. By the early 1980s, the hits had stopped coming, and the big venues were replaced by smaller and smaller clubs. The voice that had once commanded attention on national television was now competing with the clinking of beer bottles in dimly lit bars. That's where our story really begins. Not at the height of his fame, but in that Texas dive bar in 1989, where three musicians were about to change everything. But before we dive into that fateful night, let's look at how Freddy Fender became one of the biggest stars in country music, and what led to his dramatic fall from grace. Because sometimes you have to understand the depths of someone's struggle to appreciate the height of their comeback. The mid-1970s were a golden era for country music, but few stories shine as brightly as Freddy Fender's meteoric rise to fame. After years of playing in local Texas bands and recording Spanish-language rock and roll, Freddy caught the attention of producer Huey Moe, known in the industry as the Crazy Cajun. Their partnership would prove to be the catalyst that would transform a regional Tex-Mex performer into a national superstar. Moe saw something special in Freddy's voice, a natural ability to convey emotion that transcended language barriers. In 1974, he convinced Freddy to record Before the Next Teardrop Falls in both English and Spanish, a decision that would prove revolutionary. The song's arrangement was simple, letting Freddy's voice take center stage, his gentle tenor carrying both the English verses and Spanish chorus with equal conviction. When the song hit radio stations in early 1975, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Within weeks, before the next Teardrop Falls had climbed both the country and pop charts, eventually reaching #1 on both, a feat rarely achieved by any artist, let alone a Mexican-American singer from Texas. The song spent 2 weeks at the top of the country charts and earned Freddie the Country Music Association's Single of the Year award. But Freddie wasn't done. His follow-up single, a re-recording of his 1959 song, Wasted Days and Wasted Nights, proved equally successful. The song showcased a different side of Freddie's talent, a rockabilly energy that got people dancing while still maintaining that signature emotional delivery that had made Teardrop so special. The song's history added to its appeal. Freddie had originally recorded it in 1959, but his career was interrupted when he was arrested for marijuana possession, serving nearly 3 years in Angola prison. By the end of 1975, Freddy Fender had achieved what seemed impossible just a year earlier. He'd appeared on all the major television shows, from American Bandstand to Hee Haw. His performance on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson was particularly memorable. Carson, normally reserved with musical guests, was so impressed that he invited Freddie to sit for an interview, a rare honor for a country artist. His albums were selling millions of copies, and his concerts were selling out across the country. At the Houston Astrodome, he drew over 40,000 fans, breaking attendance records. For Latino audiences, he was more than just a star. He was proof that the American dream was possible. His success opened doors for other Latin artists in country music, proving that authentic cultural expression could find a home in Nashville. The hits continued through 1976 and 1977. Secret Love reached #1 on the country charts, while You'll Lose a Good Thing showcased his ability to handle R&B material with the same authenticity he brought to country and Tex-Mex music. His live performances cemented his reputation as one of country music's most engaging performers. His ability to switch effortlessly between English and Spanish, country and rock, ballads and up-tempo numbers, made him unique in an industry that often preferred artists to stay in their lane. But the music industry can be unforgiving, and success often comes with a price. As the 1970s drew to a close, Freddie would face challenges that would test not just his career, but his very survival. The same crossover appeal that had made him a star would soon become a double-edged sword, leaving him caught between two worlds and watching his hard-won success slowly slip away. What happened next would push Freddy Fender to the brink and set the stage for one of music's most unexpected comebacks. As the 1970s came to a close, the music industry was changing. Disco was dominating the airwaves, and country music was shifting towards a more polished, urban sound known as countrypolitan. Freddy Fender, with his unique blend of Tex-Mex, country, and rock and roll, suddenly found himself out of step with the times. The raw, emotional authenticity that had made him a star was falling out of fashion. The first signs of trouble came in 1978. His record sales began to decline, and radio stations were playing his new releases less frequently. The crossover appeal that had once made him special now worked against him. Country radio thought he was too pop. Pop radio thought he was too country, and both seemed to be moving away from the bilingual approach that had made him famous. His 1978 single, Talk to Me, barely cracked the top 20, a far cry from his earlier chart-topping success. But external factors weren't the only challenges Freddie faced. Years of touring and the pressures of stardom had taken their toll. Like many artists of his era, he struggled with substance abuse. The demanding schedule of performances, recording sessions, and television appearances had led him to seek relief in alcohol and drugs. His once reliable voice began to show signs of strain, and his performances became increasingly unpredictable. A particularly difficult show in Las Vegas in 1979 became a turning point. Freddie, struggling with his demons, delivered a performance so erratic that the casino canceled the remainder of his engagement. Word spread quickly through the industry, and other venues began to hesitate before booking him. The incident marked the beginning of a steep decline. By 1980, Freddie's record label, ABC/Dot, had been sold to MCA Records. The new management had different priorities, and Freddy's contract wasn't renewed. He found himself without a major label deal for the first time since his breakthrough. Smaller labels picked him up, but they lacked the promotional muscle to get his music the attention it deserved. His 1980 album, Together We Drifted Apart, seemed like a sadly prophetic title. The venues got smaller, the crowds thinner. The same artist who had once played to packed houses at the Grand Ole Opry was now taking gigs in small clubs and county fairs. His income dropped dramatically and financial problems mounted. The IRS came calling, looking for back taxes from his years of success. At one point, he was forced to sell his publishing rights to some of his biggest hits just to stay afloat. The early 1980s were particularly tough. While newer artists like George Strait and Reba McEntire were ascending to stardom, Freddie was struggling to keep his career alive. He continued to record and perform, but the magic that had made him a superstar seemed to have vanished. Some nights, playing to nearly empty rooms, he wondered if his time in the spotlight was over for good. A 1983 attempt at a comeback album, I Love My Freedom, failed to chart despite its quality material. By 1987, Freddie had hit rock bottom. He checked himself into a drug treatment facility in Houston, determined to overcome his addictions. It was a difficult period, but it proved to be a turning point. He emerged from treatment with his voice intact and a renewed determination to make music, even if it meant starting over from scratch. For the first time in years, he was thinking clearly about his future. But sometimes when things seem darkest, fate has a way of stepping in. In 1989, as Freddie was rebuilding his life one small club at a time, 3 musicians would walk into that Texas dive bar and see something that others had missed. They weren't looking for a comeback story. They were looking for a sound that only Freddy Fender could provide. And what they would create together would become legendary in the annals of Texas music history. That night in 1989 wasn't just another gig at another small club. When Doug Sahm, Flaco Jimenez, and Augie Myers walked in, they brought with them decades of Texas music history. Each was a legend in his own right, carrying the authentic sound of the Texas borderlands in their souls. Sahm was already a legend, having led the Sir Douglas Quintet to international fame in the 1960s with hits like She's About a Mover. Jimenez was the undisputed master of the conjunto accordion, having played with everyone from Bob Dylan to the Rolling Stones. Myers' distinctive Vox organ sound had helped define Tex-Mex rock and roll through his work with the Sir Douglas Quintet and countless other projects. They weren't there by accident. Doug Sahm had been nurturing an idea, a supergroup that could capture the true sound of Texas, a combination of country, rock, conjunto, and Tejano that would reflect the cultural melting pot of the Southwest. He'd been watching the music industry become increasingly segregated by genre and language, and he wanted to prove that real Texas music ignored those boundaries. He already had Flaco and Augie on board, but something was missing. When they heard Freddie's voice that night, cutting through the bar noise with that same emotional power that had once made him a star, they knew they'd found the missing piece. The timing was perfect. All 4 musicians were at crossroads in their careers, each carrying their own legacy, but searching for something new. Sahm had recently returned to Texas after years in California, eager to reconnect with his roots. Jimenez was looking to expand beyond the traditional conjunto circuit. Myers was ready for a new challenge after years of session work, and Freddie, now sober and ready for a fresh start, brought with him not just his voice, but a renewed spirit. The chemistry between the 4 was immediate and electric. Their first rehearsal, held in a small San Antonio studio, was like nothing any of them had experienced before. Freddie's country vocals blended seamlessly with Flaco's accordion runs, while Doug and Augie provided the rock and roll backbone. They started with songs they all knew, border radio classics, country standards, rock and roll hits. But something magical happened when they played them together. They weren't trying to fit into any particular genre. They were creating their own. They called themselves the Texas Tornadoes, a name that perfectly captured their musical force. Warner Brothers Records, hearing about the project through industry buzz, signed them immediately. The label understood that this wasn't just another band. It was a cultural movement waiting to happen. The band's debut performance at the 1990 presidential inaugural ball in Washington, D.C. sent a clear message. This wasn't just a reunion tour or a nostalgia act. Playing before an audience of political dignitaries, the Texas Tornadoes unleashed their border music with no compromises. Their set list mixed Spanish-language conjunto classics with country hits and rock and roll standards, all delivered with an energy that had the political elite dancing in the aisles. Even President Bush was seen tapping his feet. Their self-titled debut album, released later that year, exceeded everyone's expectations. The lead single, Hey Baby Que Paso, became an instant Tex-Mex classic, while their version of Who Were You Thinking Of showed they could handle straight-ahead country with equal skill. Critics praised the album's authenticity and raw energy, calling it a perfect representation of Texas border music. But the formation of the Texas Tornadoes wasn't just about musical success, it was about cultural impact. As the 1990s began, this unlikely supergroup would help reshape the landscape of American roots music, proving that the borders between musical genres, like the borders between countries, were meant to be crossed. And for Freddy Fender, the best was yet to come. His voice, which had once topped the charts and then fallen silent, was about to reach new heights of recognition and respect. The Texas Tornadoes arrived at a crucial moment in American music history. As the 1990s began, the mainstream music industry was becoming increasingly segregated by genre, with radio formats and record labels drawing ever stricter lines between styles. But the Tornadoes refused to play by those rules. Their music celebrated the cultural crossroads of Texas, mixing languages and styles with a freedom that felt both revolutionary and deeply traditional. The group's impact was immediate and far-reaching. Their appearances on Austin's City Limits and Late Night with David Letterman introduced millions of viewers to Tex-Mex music in its purest form. Unlike the watered-down Latin crossover attempts of the era, the Tornadoes presented their cultural fusion without compromise. When Freddy would seamlessly switch from country crooning to Spanish verses, backed by Flaco's accordion and Doug's rock and roll guitar, audiences witnessed the true sound of the borderlands. Their albums sold well beyond the traditional markets for either country or Latin music. College radio stations picked up their music, introducing a new generation to Tex-Mex sounds. Rock critics praised their authenticity, while country fans appreciated their rootsy approach. In dance halls across Texas, their music brought together audiences that rarely mixed, creating a model for cultural unity through music. For Freddy, this success was particularly sweet. In 1990, the Texas Tornadoes won a Grammy for Best Mexican-American Performance for their debut album. Standing on stage at the Grammy ceremony, Freddy couldn't help but reflect on how far he'd come from those empty bars just a year earlier. His voice cracked with emotion during his acceptance speech as he thanked his bandmates for believing in him when others had written him off. The group's success opened doors for a new generation of bicultural artists. Young musicians like Los Lobos, the Mavericks, and Rick Trevino saw in the Texas Tornadoes a model for how to honor their heritage while creating something new. The sight of Freddy Fender, a former migrant worker turned country star, sharing equal billing with Anglo and Hispanic bandmates, sent a powerful message about music's ability to transcend cultural barriers. Their live shows became legendary celebrations of Texas culture. One night they might be playing a prestigious concert hall, the next a Mexican restaurant or a honky-tonk. Every performance was a masterclass in musical fusion, with Freddy's voice soaring over Flaco's accordion runs, while Doug and Augie laid down their signature groove. Between songs, they'd banter in Spanglish, telling stories and jokes that reflected the bicultural reality of Texas life. The joy they took in playing together was infectious, and audiences couldn't help but be swept up in it. In 1992, Freddy achieved another career milestone when he won a Grammy Award for Best Latin Pop Album for his solo record, Canciones de mi Barrio. The award validated what his fans had always known, that his talent transcended any single genre or language. He was no longer just the comeback kid, he was a respected elder statesman of American music. The album's success proved that his voice had grown richer with age, adding new depths of emotion to songs he'd known since childhood. The Texas Tornadoes continued to record and tour throughout the 1990s, releasing albums that further explored the possibilities of their unique sound. Songs like Little Bit Is Better Than Nada became anthems of Tex-Mex culture, While their Spanish-language versions of rock classics helped bridge the gap between different musical traditions, their 1996 album Four Aces showed they could still innovate, incorporating new sounds while staying true to their roots. But as the millennium approached, time would begin to take its toll on this remarkable collaboration. The same forces that had brought these four legendary musicians together would eventually pull them in different directions. Yet the legacy they created together would continue to influence American music long after their final performance. For Freddy Fender, these years with the Texas Tornadoes would prove to be not just a comeback, but a vindication of everything he'd stood for throughout his career. The turn of the millennium brought new challenges for Freddy Fender. Health issues began to surface, yet his determination to make music never wavered. Even as diabetes and hepatitis C took their toll, he continued to perform whenever he could, his voice still carrying that emotional power that had first made him a star. During performances, he might need to sit on a stool, but once he started singing, the years seemed to fall away. The Texas Tornadoes experienced a devastating loss in 1999 with the death of Doug Sahm, their founding member and driving force. Sam's passing left a void that could never truly be filled. The group would never be quite the same, though they would occasionally reunite for special performances. These shows became celebrations not just of their music, but of a unique moment in American cultural history that they had helped create. Each performance felt like a tribute to Doug's vision of borderless music. Despite his health challenges, Freddy continued to receive recognition for his contributions to music. In 2002, he was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame's Walkway of Stars, an acknowledgement of his groundbreaking role in bringing Latin influences to country music. His hometown of San Benito, Texas, named a street after him and established a museum celebrating his achievements. The museum displays his gold records alongside his mother's old transistor radio, the one that had first introduced him to American popular music. The music industry also continued to acknowledge his influence. In 2002, he won another Grammy Award for Best Latin Pop Album for La Música de Valdemar Huerta, a collection that returned to his roots featuring Spanish-language versions of classic American pop songs. The album was particularly meaningful to Freddy because he recorded it under his birth name, coming full circle from the young man who had changed his name to find acceptance in the music industry. Even in his final years, Freddy remained an inspiration to younger artists. Musicians like Los Lonely Boys sought him out for advice and collaboration, while the Mavericks' Raul Malo cited him as a crucial influence in showing how to maintain cultural authenticity while achieving mainstream success. His ability to maintain his cultural identity while achieving mainstream success provided a blueprint for generations to follow. In 2006, Freddy Fender passed away at his home in Corpus Christi, Texas, leaving behind a legacy that had forever changed the face of American music. His funeral was attended by musicians from across the spectrum, country stars, rock and rollers, conjunto players, all paying tribute to a man who had helped break down the barriers between their genres. Today, Freddy Fender's music continues to resonate. His hits are still played on radio stations across the country, and his work with the Texas Tornadoes remains a high watermark for cross-cultural collaboration in American music. Modern artists like Casey Musgraves and the Las Bandoleros continue to follow the path he helped forge, mixing country music with Latin influences. The barriers he broke down between languages, between genres, between cultures, helped pave the way for today's more inclusive music industry. His success showed that authenticity and cultural pride could be assets rather than obstacles in reaching a mainstream audience. The struggles he faced and overcame, from discrimination to addiction to career setbacks, made his triumphs all the more meaningful. From the cotton fields of San Benito to the top of the charts, from empty bars to Grammy glory, Freddy Fender's journey embodied the American dream. But more than that, it showed how music could bridge the gaps between cultures, languages, and traditions. His unexpected comeback with the Texas Tornadoes wasn't just a personal triumph. It was proof that authentic, boundary-crossing music would always find its audience. In the end, Freddy Fender's greatest legacy might be this. He showed us that music, at its best, knows no borders. And sometimes the most powerful comebacks happen not when we try to recapture past glory, but when we find the courage to create something entirely new.